Today my guest is from the Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulations, Chief of Staff, General Counsel Greg White. So welcome to Littleton.
Well, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Well, yours is a state agency.
It is.
And I just wondered if you could tell us something about it.
Sure.
Right now.
I'm with the Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation, and there's a misconception out there. People hear of Consumer Affairs and right away they think of the Attorney General's office. That's a big part of what they do. They have the Consumer Protection Bureau. However, we're a separate state agency, and we have a pretty broad mandate. We oversee 5 agencies as well as having our own mandate within internally. We oversee the Division of Insurance, which regulates, amongst other things, property insurance, auto insurance, healthcare insurance. We oversee the Division of Banks, which regulates state-chartered banks, credit unions, mortgage lenders, and debt collectors, amongst other things. We oversee the Department of Telecommunications and Cable, which regulates the telecommunications and cable industry in Massachusetts. We oversee the Division of Standards, and I'll talk a little bit more about it when we talk about skimmers. But essentially what they do is they go and inspect fuel pumps around Massachusetts. So if you ever get your gas pumped in, you'll see a sticker. Now it could be the local town inspector, or it could be one of our state inspectors, and they go around to the various towns that they're contracted with.
Does every town have an inspector?
If they don't, they contract with us. If they have under 5,000, we inspect them. If they have over 5,000, they can residents, they can contract with us. And we have approximately 67 towns that we contract with, in addition to the smaller towns. So it's in addition to that, they inspect fuel delivery trucks to make sure that you're getting what is being advertised. They inspect price scanners at stores. They also regulate auto body shops and auctioneers, amongst other things. So they have a fairly broad mandate as well. And then we have the Division of Professional Licensures, which basically licenses 375,000 trades throughout Massachusetts, from veterinarians to chiropractors to accountants to electricians. And it's a fairly broad network that they oversee. We just implemented a e-licensing, which is online licensing, where people can go online and go through the process without having to come into Boston. So those are the 5 primary agencies that we oversee. But in addition to that, we have our own internal mandate. We oversee the data breach. So if you're an entity and your data has been breached and involves Massachusetts consumers, then they're required to notify us and the Attorney General's office. They're required to notify us as to what the nature of the breach is, how many Massachusetts consumers have been impacted by it, and what steps they've taken to rectify it. We're basically a reporting agency. It's the Attorney General's office that does the enforcement end of it. In addition to that, we have the Do Not Call list. Again, in conjunction with the Attorney General's office, we oversee it, but they do the enforcement on that as well. We have the Lemon Law arbitration program that we oversee, and one of the most important programs that we oversee is the Home Improvement Contracting and Guaranteed Fund. The way that works is, in Massachusetts, if you're doing home improvement contracting, and for the most part, pretty much any type of home improvement on a residential home falls under it. There's certain exemptions. Interior painting, you're not required to have an HIC. Above ground pools, you're not required to have an HIC. But any type of roofing, carpentry, that sort of thing, you are required. And basically, you have to register every 2 years. You pay a registration fee, and then you pay a one-time fee into the guarantee fund. And the way that works is, if in fact you're a consumer and you've been aggrieved by the process, and provided you meet the criteria, you can apply to the guaranteed fund and potentially recoup up to $10,000.
Wow.
So as we were talking about before, it doesn't guarantee quality of work, but it does provide you a level of protection if you've been agree by the process.
So, which a lot of seniors should know about too, because oftentimes they go after the seniors.
Absolutely. And so what we advise consumers to do, especially seniors, is to go online or contact our office, and we can provide the number to your viewers
We will.
later. But go online or call us, and you can determine whether or not they are registered. If they're not registered, you shouldn't be doing business with them.
Yeah, and they really, really should check.
Absolutely.
I mean, because so often we take it for granted.
Yep.
And things are done, and then all of a sudden it isn't what you expected.
Right,
And
exactly.
so, and then they lose money.
Exactly. And so if you go online or contact us, we can tell you if they're properly registered or if, in fact, their registration's been revoked. Because in addition to overseeing the fund, we also have a complaint process. So if you have an issue with a contractor, you can file a complaint with the Office of Consumer Affairs. We have hearing officers that conduct the hearings, and at the conclusion of the hearing, they can do one of a number of things. They can dismiss the complaint, they can fine the contractor, they can suspend their registration, or they can revoke it.
Yeah.
And we have revoked it in situations where we felt it was appropriate.
Yeah.
But we're working with all the towns and city officials throughout the Commonwealth. One of our biggest line of defense is the town building inspectors. I reached out to them over the past year and sent them a letter, and we followed up with phone calls, basically asking them before a contractor pulls a permit that you ensure that they're registered.
Okay.
What their contractor will do to avoid having to register is they'll tell the homeowner, go ahead and pull the permit. You shouldn't be pulling your own permit. If he's a legitimate contractor, that contractor should pull the permit. And when they go into the town, the majority of the time a building inspector is going to ask them, are you in fact registered? If you're not, they're not going to issue the permit.
Yeah.
And that's gone a long way. We get calls and letters from town building inspectors throughout the Commonwealth saying, you know what, we just had a situation where they came in and we wouldn't issue the permit. We've had contractors come in and say to us, listen, I tried to pull a permit, they wouldn't, so I need to register. As we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we just implemented an online process. So in the past, you would either have to mail it in and wait a significant period of time, or come into Boston, which was inconvenient if you're from the western part of the state. Now you can go online and register, and we have a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah.
In October, we're going to do the renewals. So we're trying to make it convenient for contractors, and we're trying to level the playing field. So at the end of the day, the most important thing is protecting the consumer. And we also just implemented a public awareness campaign using social media and Facebook, reaching out to thousands of consumers as well as contractors, letting them know what their obligations are. And one of the groups, the focus has been this summer, is on exterior painters.
Oh.
They're required to register. I think for the most part, many of them are legitimate but aren't aware of their obligation. My wife and I, last summer, had our house painted. We had half a dozen contractors give us quotes. Some had been in the business 20, 25 years, had gotten great references, and had workers' comp, had all the proper permits, but they weren't properly registered. So I think I increased the compliance rate in our town significantly.
Uh-oh. We're having our house painted this week.
Okay, all right.
So I'll probably go home and say, excuse me.
Yep.
I'm sure my husband did this already. So.
He could have.
But now you're making me aware that, there's other things that we should check.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's simple as, in fact, the painter we went with was not registered. So I gave him an application and I expedited it. Now we have online, so that process takes care of itself. At the end of the day, it doesn't guarantee that the quality of work will be there. That you're going to get from references and what have you.
Yeah.
But what it does is it provides you a level of protection should you be aggrieved by the process. So those are our primary programs within the Office of Consumer Affairs. And one of our, last but not least, is our consumer hotline. We have 4 outstanding students from Northeastern and one from Emerson that spend 6 months with us during the year from Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. They man the hotline, and they take hundreds of calls from consumers throughout Massachusetts on a variety of different topics. And They're not in the business to provide legal advice, but what they do is they will either answer the question or they will direct you to the appropriate agency. And they do an outstanding job in keeping consumers apprised of different entities that can address their underlying issues.
So is that line only 6 months?
No, every 6 months we have a new group of co-ops.
Okay.
Northeastern, as you know, has a co-op program, and basically a portion of their studies is devoted to doing internships.
Okay.
And we've had this program in existence for years, and they're a great group. We had an outstanding group last spring. This group started July 1st. They'll stay with us till December, and then we'll have a new group coming on in January.
Good,
So,
good.
yeah,
They probably need a rest, too.
Yeah, exactly.
If they have that many calls, oh my
Although
goodness.
they have, I mean, the types of calls they get, and sometimes are very entertaining. But again, at the end of the day, they're in the business of helping to inform the consumer. With that are some of the issues that come up during these calls.
Exactly.
One of the biggest things that we're addressing now is cybersecurity. Years ago, I spent 14 years as a prosecutor in Massachusetts in 3 district attorney's offices. And when I was a young prosecutor, back in the day, identity theft consisted of someone losing their wallet and then taking their date of birth or their license number, which back in the day usually was your social security number.
Right.
Now, people don't even have to leave their homes. They could be halfway across the world and they're tapping into your system, if
Right.
you will. And
Yeah. And actually, I think that we're giving out too much personal information.
We do.
I mean, my husband and I happen to be dinosaurs because we still have a landline. We
Yep.
have cell phones, but we still have a landline. And we don't buy anything online, and we don't really, every time they ask for information, it's
Yep.
like, I don't think so.
Right, exactly, and that's what we advise consumers is, you know what, if there's a concern there, then pause and try to go in a different direction. I mean, someone asked me the other day, how do you protect yourself? I said, well, use cash and don't you have a computer? That's unrealistic.
Right.
It's not a question as to whether or not you or I are going to be a victim of identity theft. That's inevitable. It's just a question of how often and when it'll occur. I mean, I was with the Bush administration in Washington, and the Office of Personnel Management had their system hacked. Millions of current and former federal employees had their information compromised. In addition to that, my mortgage company notified us last summer that we had been a victim of identity theft. So, what we tell consumers is just be careful with your information. And one of the biggest things that you can do is protect your password and change it often on your computer.
Yeah.
People go with something that can be commonly associated with that individual, and it's not too difficult to hack into their system. I received a call, or I should say an email, from my brother who lives in Europe about a year ago, and he said to me, you need to change your password, it's been hacked. Someone was sending him emails halfway around the world. So I went in and I changed it, it's a 6-digit number followed by 2 names that can't be associated with me. And it's so complex that my son and I were running a half a marathon in Philadelphia last fall, and the gun was about to go off, and I asked him, I was trying to get into my iTunes, and he said, well, what's your password? And I gave it to him. By the time he had entered it all in, the gun had gone off and everyone had run by us. But I can tell you, no one's going to be getting into my system anytime soon.
Well, I was thinking that it's a good thing you're with this office because so many things have happened to you personally.
Exactly.
But at least you know what to do.
Right, and the undersecretary and I kid about that.
Yeah.
We say we're like the perfect victim out there.
This gives you training.
Exactly. Well, I'll talk a moment about some of the scams and how I've been approached on that. But so So with the computers, it's change your password often and mix it up.
Well, you do forget to do that, though.
You
because,
do, because it's convenient.
Yeah,
you know, it's
I
such
know.
but there's, I mean, in government, in business, they continually are telling you to update your password, and if you don't, I teach at Clark University, and they're forever changing, you know, and I just memorized my password and they're moving it on. So, but at the end of the day, it's important,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Some of the other types of identity thefts that we're seeing are dumpster divers. Are you familiar with that concept?
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
But not in that. Not because of people taking that. It's more like finding pieces that you can do over.
Okay, all right. Well, these are people that their primary focus is your personal information. And it's amazing what people will do. They'll throw out tax returns, bank statements, and this information can get in the wrong hands and your information can be compromised. So what we advised consumers is to invest in a paper shredder. They're
Right.
cheap
Yeah.
money, and you know, shred your old documents that you would be typically prone to throw out.
Okay.
The other thing, and one of the most important issues that we're dealing with is skimming devices. And those are what we talked about early in the show. They're showing up in a variety of different areas. Our Division of Standards, which basically inspects fuel pumps, are finding them throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Our Division of Banks are finding skimmers in ATM machines in state-chartered banks and credit unions throughout Massachusetts. And in addition to that, they're showing up at scanners at department stores or credit card devices, if you will. And they're also showing up with handheld skimmers at bus stations, airports, train stations, and what they'll do is they'll brush up against you with a device, you won't even know it, and they're downloading your information from your purse or your wallet.
Yeah. Is there any way at all that, I mean, you personally can tell if you're at a machine that something's wrong?
Well, one of the things that we advise consumers to do is on the gas pump, they'll have an tampering, or I should say a tampering sticker. And if it's removed, then you should notify the proprietor. You know, not all of them have it. I was down the Cape, and this one convenience store didn't have them on any of theirs. But I think it was just a matter of they just didn't have them on. But if you see it, it's been compromised or tampered with, you should notify the proprietor, because you're not going to know. It's within the machine. You know, same thing with on the banks. What they'll do is they'll put a facade over the cover of the ATM machine, and then they'll mount a camera on the side. And what that's doing is it's downloading your PIN number as it downloads your information from your credit card in the machine. We had a situation not too long ago where a correction officer from, I think, Massachusetts was attending a concert in Providence, and he went to an ATM machine and he noticed that the thing was crooked. So he pulled it and he pulled off the skimming device. We recommend that you don't do that. The reason being is that is potentially forensic evidence, and so you want to notify the local law enforcement or the proprietor. They'll notify a lot of times the Secret Service or the FBI or the local department to come in. And we just grabbed a group of individuals in the South Shore driving around with a vehicle with Texas plates, and they were stopped for an open warrant. They found skimming devices in the vehicle, and they determined that they came from various gas stations throughout the South Shore.
You know, well, the funny thing is that when you have your card and you're at a bank or even in a store, half the time, you kind of cover it from the person standing next to you.
Exactly.
When really it's happening right here in the machine.
Exactly. And,
wow, that's...
they've come up with the chip and pin, which provides a level of protection. Not all entities have that. They risk exposing themselves to liability, because if you're required to have it and you don't, then the bank won't be reimbursing the consumer. That entity will. But not all folks have implemented that, even though many of them are required to do so. But these skimming devices are happening throughout Massachusetts and throughout the country. Recently, we did a cybersecurity conference this past fall. We're doing another one at the Federal Reserve on September 13th, and we're inviting all banks to participate. And one of the speakers is an FBI agent from the Boston office, and his presentation is riveting. He talks about this one particular case where they were investigating an incident in a mom and pop store up in upper state New York. It was a high tourism area, a lot of traffic. They had put these skimming devices on their machines, and they've gotten very sophisticated. Back in the day, if they found a skimming device, the locals would set up surveillance and then wait for them to come back to retrieve the device. Now they basically transmit it via Bluetooth, and they leave the device in there. It's the cost of doing business. Well, they ended up finding the skimming devices, and through their investigation, they determined that it was an international operation operating out of Eastern Europe. They had compromised, thousands of individuals, and they had sent it worldwide to 30 countries with the caveat that they weren't to release it until they were given the specific date and time, at which point, once they got the green light, they released the information. Within a matter of hours, millions of dollars had been lost.
Oh my gosh.
So it's
gosh,
amazing.
I wish these people would do some good things instead of learning to do.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Now, what about this?
That is a sleeve, and we've come up with it. You can get these online. What you do is you put your credit card in there, and it protects your card from having the information downloaded. In addition to that, and I have a few for you, but we also have come up with one for a passport. Since 2007, there's a chip in your passport with all your personal information. They'll rub up against that and retrieve that information. So we have sleeves for that as well. But it's one of the ways that you can protect your information from these handheld skimming devices that are showing up throughout various venues. So those are the main types of identity thefts that we come across. In addition to that, our 800 call line, consumer hotline, takes a variety of calls involving various scammers out there. And I know that you've done your homework, and the most prominent one is, of course, the IRS scam. They've been around for years, but it's just amazing how many folks are victim to that scam, especially the seniors.
I know.
What they'll do is they'll call, and they'll, in a very official voice, said, this is the Internal Revenue Service, and basically saying that you are subject to criminal and civil prosecution. You need to call a number. There's a group operating out of Washington, the state of Washington, and New York. I mentioned before the show that I have a landline. I got 5 calls last week. And you'll call the number back, and there will be someone on the other end trying to get your personal information and telling you to wire the money to avoid being prosecuted.
I hope that whoever is watching the show listens to that carefully, because a lot of times, I hate to keep saying seniors, because seniors are really, we're very bright people.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
And so we know, that things are happening, but some people who are not paying attention would be taking this call and being a little frightened, especially if, say, someone lives alone a long time. They might be a little frightened, like, what did I do wrong?
Exactly.
And
exactly.
What do I need to do? They
come off as sounding very official. The reality is the Internal Revenue Service doesn't make phone calls. They're not calling you. That's not how they're reaching out to you. When in doubt, pick up the phone and call the Andover office and talk to the Internal Revenue Service, and I can guarantee that it's going to be a scam. They're not calling and saying you're subject to criminal prosecution. In the unlikely event that does occur, call the Andover office and get verification. But do not be sending money. Do not be giving any personal information to these. And they're extremely rude. They use profanity. We had a woman in our office whose mother had received a dozen calls over 24 hours, and they were just insulting and whatnot. And then I had one of the attorneys from my office call, and the call ceased. But they're persistent, if not anything.
So we have to understand that if somebody is treating you like that, they're not with this.
The Internal Revenue Service, yeah.
And so.
Yeah, and they're not, first off, again, that's not how the IRS operates. But when in doubt, pick up the phone and call the IRS. The other thing is the grandparent scam.
Oh, yeah.
That's been around for a while, but again, especially the seniors are.
We had something happen like this that really surprised me. My mother-in-law lives in North Carolina.
Yep.
My son is 50 years old. He lives in Georgia.
Sure.
Okay? And so she got a call that my son needed her because he was in jail and something. And she called us, and we were like, how did you get a call down there about our son?
Yeah, because what they're doing is your information, for the most part, is everywhere, especially if you use social media, Facebook. They can go online and they can determine whether or not you have children, for many times where they're studying, if they're studying abroad, if they're studying, down. We had a call, our undersecretary's mother-in-law received the same type of call involving a relative. She lives in Texas. Her grandson was studying in Georgia. Same thing. Middle of the night, called, being detained, you need to send bond to such and such. Unfortunately, she went to the local Western Union, and the guy behind the counter was good enough to tell her, ma'am, I'd love to take your money, but you're being scammed. So she left, and she went to another outlet who took her money, and she was out that money. So it's unfortunate, but that's what they'll do. They'll find out some personal information.
Right.
They'll know the grandchild's name, because they've gone online and they found that out. So they're very sophisticated in terms of using social media to get this information. So the grandparent scam is a well-known scam. The fake lottery scam, I'm sure you've heard of that. A lot of times they'll do it via email. You've won a lottery, you've won $1 million. You need to contact this individual, this office, and then what they'll say is, we'll send you the check, but we need to take the taxes up front. So just wire us $10,000.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you would think most people would say, that's crazy. There was an article in the Boston Globe maybe 3 months ago about a group of individuals who had been a victim of the scam. One guy in particular had received 3 different contacts from 3 separate entities saying that he had won a lottery. The 4th contact was another group that said, we understand that you've won 3 international lotteries. By U.S. law, you can't collect more than 1 unless you join our association. He did, and he was out thousands of dollars, And so if it sounds too good to be true, in fact it is.
Whatever makes them think that you have $10,000 to send them? I mean, do they
just,
know your bank account too?
Well, I don't think that that's sophisticated.
They just figure if you have
the odds. You hit 100 callers, you get 2 people who are going to be vulnerable enough to send you money. So that's why they're calling 5, 6, 10 times a day, just the hopes. Now, one of the things, we did this public listening session throughout Massachusetts, all our agencies and all agency heads. We were up in Lowell, we were down the Cape, we were out in Worcester and Springfield, and we got seniors who are saying, how do I vote? I said, invest in an answering machine. They hate that. They hate that. They'll leave the message. I got, as I said, 5 calls last week from the Internal Revenue Service saying, this is your final call, like
good.
The agency, exactly. But I got 4 more calls after that. So, invest in an answering machine. They hate that. The ones that aren't adhering to the do not call list, people, I'll say if they're looking to commit a criminal infraction against you, they're not going to adhere to the fact that you're on a do not call list.
Okay.
So use an answering machine, because then, they'll either hang up or they'll just leave a message and then you promptly delete it, and that's the end of it.
Right.
That's how we handle it. Or you have caller ID if you don't recognize it, which leads to the last scam that we're seeing more. It's called the one-ring scam.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that?
Nope, okay. I'm going to be.
Okay, exactly. The way that works is that they will call, and it's a group operating out of the Caribbean. They'll call, usually your cell phone, and they'll let it ring once, and then they'll hang up. So if you're like most people, they see missed call, and they want to know who's calling their cell phone, so they call them back. But they have it's set up in a way that once you call back, it's tied into their system and your carrier. And the longer they keep you on the phone, the longer they ring up a bill.
Oh, okay.
And I received a call at work 7 months ago. Again, it's like, and I had one of the lawyers come in, and I said, he said, you didn't call back? And I said, yeah, I did. And he said, oh, that's the one-ring scam. You don't want to do that. So I promptly called my provider and let them know about it. But that's how their folks are operating. So with all this in terms of identity theft and all the issues facing consumers, especially seniors, one of the things that we advise consumers to do is to get your credit report once a year. By federal law, they're required, the three major are required to provide one credit report per year. They can also put a freeze on your credit if, in fact, when the mortgage company notified me that I had been a victim of identity theft, they put a freeze on my credit. What that'll do is you can check to see if someone has compromised your information. Again, this didn't happen to me, but there's someone I was familiar with.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we had, my wife and I were having some renovations on our home with a registered HIC contractor, mind you, and the woman who was doing the layout basically said to us, oh, you were the Office of Consumer Affairs? Yeah, I went to refinance my home, and I learned that someone had compromised my information. They had purchased a condominium in her name with her credit and leased a brand new vehicle. She wasn't even aware of that. And you won't be aware of it until they start defaulting on their loans. And then they'll come back to you and say, well, you missed these payments.
Yeah.
So check once a year, and if in fact, and then you can dispute the charges as well. So those are things that you can take to be proactive in terms of identity theft.
Well, I hope that everybody that was watching gained a whole lot today.
I hope so.
Yeah, I think they did. I know I did.
Great.
And I just want to tell everyone to protect yourself and your information. Don't get scammed. But if you have questions, you can call 617-973-8787, or there's a toll-free number. I have it right here. It's 888-283-3757. Or you can go to the website, which is www.mass.gov/consumer. So thank you for joining us today.
And thank you for having me. I enjoyed
it.
It's always a pleasure.
Well, good. And maybe we'll have you back again sometime.
Absolutely. I'd love to.